Okay. So can you, sorry, it's my email. Can I see this doc?
Yes.
So in the Monday volume snapshot meeting, we discussed this kind of change related to external snapshotter controller. But I'm not sure, maybe because not all the people joined, no one asked question or have any concerns. So nothing. But for us, before we move into the working on this, I think all of us want to kind of make sure we are on the same page and we are very sure positive about this change because after looking at the code, I think there is still quite some work. I think Xiangqian also talk about this, and so we want to make sure this work bring us enough benefits. So I think the main thing is for now external controller, right? Act more like if we consider the PV controller and external provision and driver part, is kind of combine everything together. So current external snapshotter includes a controller act very much like PV controller, which binds volume snapshot and snapshot content, that bind logic. And also it will trigger the CSI calls through the driver. And so now we are considering separate them and deploy them separately. So the logic for binding volume snapshot and snapshot content will be in, let's say, kube system namespace and deploy as, let's say, stateful set or deployment as a separate controller. And the rest, the driver part, will deploy it as, let's say, a sidecar. And we list some pros and cons. I want to see everyone to see whether you have more feedback, concerns, whether we list, we have a complete list. So the benefits. Oh, anyone say something?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So just to be clear, right? I was in the Monday meeting, right? I fully acknowledge that this is probably the right way of moving controllers out and put into kube system so that Kubernetes has more control over it. I'm just evaluating the timeline over here for 1.16. I actually took a deep look into the code. There are currently 5 listed issues under this project, right? The controller needs to separate out. There should be metrics. We need to flip the base for the version and the feature gates. Timeout. There's a timeout issue for snapshotting. What do we do with that in the controller? And there's testing. Listening to all these 5 together makes me believe that is not probably doable within the 1.16 frame. I'm not sure how you guys look at this, but at least from my perspective, it looks like there's a whole bunch of work over there.
So yeah, for just to kind of clear the timeout issue, I think we discuss and have a conclusion, and the change is quite small, at least as far as we are currently the way we want to work it out.
But that the heavy lifting part is the controller and the metrics and testing.
Yes.
These are 3 pistons. The metrics also depends on the controller change as well, because if you want to expose anything, you need to wait until the controller is moved out. So those kind of explicit dependencies makes me believe that it's probably hard to achieve within this time frame. I just want to see what you guys think about this, and also what is the drawbacks if we stay as it is at this point of time and go to beta and later on go back and revisit it?
The main thing is, I think, backwards compatibility. If we go to beta, we sort of like agreed to maintain this model according to the beta policy, which is 6 months. So once we go to beta, it's going to be harder to change the higher level architecture of this.
But those storage vendors, they have their own snapshotter, which is implemented the way it is in open source at this point of time, or rather are there any like directions they preferred? Did you guys get any feedback from them yet?
I think the main feedback I've gotten from vendors is they think the sidecars are too complicated, right? They don't actually want to own sidecars. They want Kubernetes to own all the complicated controller logic and make that the responsibility of Kubernetes. But the way that it's currently implemented, it puts all the burden on the vendors to understand the intricate design of the snapshotter controller.
But I don't think this split will make that better, because we still have a sidecar. They actually have a general concern on all the sidecars.
Yes, but I'm saying like it will help, right? It makes the sidecar lighter.
The sidecar,
right? But I think they still have
open source one. Sorry, if they're using the open source one, why would be there any concern? The only thing they need to do is really about deployment of the sidecar, right?
I think it's more along support. If something goes wrong, they are on the hook for making sure it's okay. It's a separation of concerns and responsibilities, really. So
because like the version of the controller that runs now depends on the version that the vendor has included, right? So and the vendor might end up deploying incompatible versions of the snapshot or with the Kubernetes version, or with different sidecars, or with different CSI plugins.
I actually don't think this will make it better. I think this can get that more complicated, because now we still have a sidecar controller, and then we have this common controller, and then you still have all the other components. So actually, I think the versioning thing will be actually a little bit more complicated in this part.
It mainly means that we have to make sure once we move the API to beta, that we maintain strict backwards compatibility with the API.
How does separating the controller out help backward compatibility in this sense? Even though you separate this controller out, in the next release of Kubernetes, it still won't change anything, right? As long as it just changed the mod, it actually changed nothing. Because what it will be providing is from the CSI repository, you're gonna provide two things, right? One is the controller that should be deployed on the kube system, and the other is the sidecar which just issued the CSI call, right? Monitor some snapshot object, and that's it. They don't do the binding. Like in this case, the version is still not solved in this manner. Is my understanding right?
Well, the main thing here is that you don't have two plugins installed that have conflicting logic in their snapshot controllers.
You don't have two plugins installed that has conflicting version in the snapshot.
So the common controller will just will install one version, because the plugins will not be install the common controller part anymore.
I don't know about that. So how do you guys envision in the future who will be responsible for installing the common controller then?
It's the Kubernetes cluster manager. They're the ones responsible for installing common infrastructure components.
So whoever manages the cluster needs to install the corresponding controller if the functionality is needed.
Yes.
So they should be responsible for install both controller and driver.
No.
No. So who?
It's like, think of like Kube controller manager today, right?
Yeah. The cluster manager, let's say, install the controller, but the driver, you mean who installed the driver? Not the user, right?
The vendor.
Or the admin, cluster admin, which might be different than the cluster manager.
Yeah, this gets
mainly the driver here is to separate the responsibilities of Kubernetes and the storage vendor into two distinct categories. And by doing so, it will allow each of them to kind of rev independently and decide whether they want to support this functionality or not. And then in addition to that, the most important thing is be able to monitor it. Right? If it's a component that I am deploying, I am managing, I can monitor it in the way that is important to me.
So I see the main thing here is if they have multiple plugins, yes, there will be multiple actually common code snapshot controller deployed. All the others maybe like I feel minor.
I think the observability is a major part.
Observability is huge.
Right, because if it's the responsibility of the plugin to have this controller, then we can't put in common monitoring because we don't know how or where or what plugins are going to be used. So we can't set up monitoring pipelines to it.
Yes.
When you
yes.
say who are you referring to? If it's a cluster administrator, they should know that, right?
If somebody comes in on a GKE cluster or a managed cluster and installs a driver that they got off the shelf somewhere.
Well, it's still the same thing because unless they schedule the controller on the Kube system, you still won't be able to monitor that by default.
Right.
Yes.
So exactly. And so if this is a scenario that we care about, which it will be, we as a managed solution can then deploy the component that we care about and that we need to do the monitoring. And therefore we'll have metrics regardless of the off-the-shelf component that a customer chooses to deploy.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking is actually if you separate the controller out, what I would be assuming is that the common controller will be responsible for any snapshot stuff, right? So regardless which storage vendor it is. And one thing I don't think there's too much discussion around it is the performance. Right now, this model is like, okay, your storage vendor, you deploy the suite by yourself. So every single storage vendor will have your own snapshot, et cetera, et cetera. Is my understanding right? Right. And if you move to the common, there's a different story because this common one will be responsible for all the storage vendors. That's one thing. And the other thing is that how do we do with the backup in the future? How do we do with one group?
Let's take it one step at a time. So first concern is around performance. And I imagine it's kind of end-to-end latency of the operation.
Yep.
So if you look at what the controller is doing today, it's not really going to change from what it's doing today, right? The sidecar container monitors objects, specifically the volume snapshot object, and the volume snapshot class object to figure out if it needs to issue a call to do a create snapshot. That logic is going to remain in that sidecar container. And once that call completes successfully, it's going to do the same thing it does today, which is create the volume snapshot content object. The only thing that
I thought it will change a little bit. It's similar to PV controller and external provisioner.
Right.
So right now, I say the snapshot controller first watch user created snapshots, kind of volume snapshots, API objects. That is one watch in today, and then it directly calls CSI driver to create. There's no other, let's say, overhead.
Right.
And if we split, that means the snapshot controller watch the volume snapshots API object created. I think it need to update some field, let's say similar to PV controller, is update some annotation so that the driver side is also has a very simple controller.
Okay, so that's fair. So I think it sounds like there's one extra write operation involved.
And write and what and read.
One extra write and one possibly a handful of extra reads.
Yes. And the driver side will watch and then create snapshot.
Yeah.
I'm very less concerned about backup and this type of long operations, but for snapshot, if you think about this application layer, they need to do a quiz, right? So I honestly don't know how much latency this thing will increase, but it's something at least I don't think there's too much discussion around.
So today, do we have an idea of how long a snapshot takes?
From my GCP kind of experiences, the snapshot cut is very quick. I think within a second. I didn't measure like this millisecond or something. It's kind of within second. And then the uploading phase, depending on your disk size, it might take kind of minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, but
so like
GCPD is it's really a different story. Right? I test this like some of the SDS before, taking a snapshot really is like a milliseconds level. Right, it's most of the consume should be the controller where it tries to update the status of the snapshot and the status of the snapshot content and try to define
but consider end-to-end, just like when you create API object and then we update the API object to indicate it is being cut. Basically, it's updated timestamp. So the total time, like we have to include the API object creation and the update time.
Exactly, and that actually makes me question the whole async thing to CSI driver for the snapshotting piece. Because if you think about the application angle, you need to actually literally stop the application for some of the applications, right? To stop the application from functioning until the snapshot of the volume has been done. And if the whole binding and binding process takes let's say take 99.99% of the whole latency time, it doesn't make any sense anymore. If you by saying that if you separate the controller out, that will make the performance tuning in the future less likely. That's basically what I was saying. The whole conversation about performance.
So with current, we haven't heard like any customer complain about it caused by the operation overhead yet.
Because it's an alpha, right? So you will not hear too many complaints about that. A lot of stuff is actually getting experienced. I was just thinking ahead, but.
So yeah, that's what we put in the cons, performance. In theory, right? It basically involve a few more API object read write operation.
Not only that, right, Jing? So that what I was saying is that using the current model where the snapshot controller and the CSI code literally sits in one task, in one binary, make it possible in the future to do the CSI call in a much let's say near synchronized way, right? And you can check you can do the binding in a much more agile manner if
that's only true if the if the application QSing code coexists with this external snapshotter, which it will not.
Say that again, please, Zach.
So I think if I understand what you're saying that if all the logic exists in a single binary, it becomes easier to optimize the end-to-end latency because you don't have to worry about network calls and things like that.
You don't need to worry too much about binding because
right.
I look into the controller implementation. It's basically a loop.
And the use case that you're concerned about is the one where you have to QS and un-QS an application.
Yeah.
So now the mechanism that has been proposed to do QS and un-QS, the execution hooks API, it is going to have completely independent set of controllers.
Of course.
Right?
But this is is a piece of it. That's what I'm saying.
I think that's where it becomes, I think we would need to figure out what percentage it is. If it's problematic, let's figure out what percentage of that end-to-end time this is adding to. And at that point, we'll have kind of better data to make a judgment. I agree. It's always nice to kind of optimize where we can. And, you know, if you have two equally good options and they're both equally easy to implement, go with the one that's more optimal, obviously. But in this case, there are trade-offs. We are introducing an extra write operation and potentially a few more read operations, which will affect the end-to-end latency. But how bad will it affect that end-to-end latency? And I think that's the key if this is still a concern.
I agree with you. Let me ask you guys a question because I haven't wrote anything about the controller. It's more about Jing and Xin over there. So when we go through when the controller actually checks the snapshot objects and also snapshot content objects, how frequently do the check-in? Is there any like time interval?
It's a
event based.
Yeah.
Is what? Sorry.
It's event based.
It's based on the event. Okay.
It's not polling. It's push notifications essentially.
No, it caches. No. It caches at least in the binary.
Yes. There is a cache.
But the cache is updated on an event-based thing, and then you queue the results whenever the event comes in.
I see. So the event. Who issues the events?
The
API server.
Okay, API server issues the events. Okay, I see.
Yeah, you watch the like snapshots add, snapshot delete event.
So we have, is this a 1 hour meeting or 30-minute meeting?
30 minutes.
Okay, so we got 2 minutes left. Am I hearing correctly that there is concern about whether we should do this or not? Or is the concern more around the timing?
Both.
Both? Okay,
Yeah.
so if it's both, then I think we need to have another meeting to discuss this because I don't think
do anyone still have a little bit of time?
I do.
I have another meeting right after.
I probably need to drop off soon.
But anyhow, this is actually just from me, right? Again, I'm very new to this community. I believe in you guys, so.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's good to raise the concerns now because I'm sure if you have them, then others are going to raise them as well. So we should all be on the same page before we go forward. One thing I recommend is, and Michelle brought this up, was a lot of this work is going to end up rolling into the CSI work group. I think, Xing, you attend that meeting already, but maybe Jing and Sean,
Right.
you can start attending that meeting as well and have this discussion as part of that meeting.
Sure. Sure. It's just like I want to make sure it won't take too much time of that meeting, and we have to like go through a few of those.
Okay, I mean, if that's the case, then maybe that's the normal plan, and we set up another one of these to finish this discussion. That's okay too.
So
who should I reach out to get involved in those meetings?
Michelle.
Michelle. So
Yes.
Michelle,
the
lead.
package is on you.
Okay.
I have a big PR for you, by the way, for the
Okay.
matrix fixing.
Sure.
And so we also want to hear like other people's feedback in that meeting.
We haven't heard anything, Jing. So it's all about us three talking. You,
Right,
Jing,
right,
and
because-
me.
Yeah, Monday, yeah, the rest of them are pretty quiet when we were talking about this.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
want to say, like CSI meeting, like there are probably other other people in other organizations.
And I think one thing to think about as we have this discussion is if you don't believe that this is the right way of doing it, let's think about how we could do metrics in a way that is sane and workable, because that is an important use case.
Well, metrics, yeah, that makes total sense. Sad, well, I'll also maybe talk to you as well about that as well.
Okay, sounds
All
good.
right.
All right,
All right.
take care,
One
guys.
more quick question. Sorry, one
Yes.
more quick question. Is there any place I can get more feedback from storage vendors with regarding to the current architecture of doing snapshot and maybe in the future for backup?
Probably SIG storage mailing list.
Yep. Feel free
Okay.
to send a message to SIG storage mailing list and saying, hey guys, here's what I'm thinking. What do you guys think?
All right. Cool. Got it.
Cool.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Happy Thursday.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.